Hoka was one of the early brands to get a super shoe out to market following Nike's launch of the Vaporfly series. They started out with the Rocket X line, but last year they released their elite version of their super shoe, which was the Cielo X1. The shoe was widely pretty well received, however, a lot of people talked about how it lacked maybe that top end speed, so Hoka went back to the lab, and what they crafted is pretty crazy. Meet the Hoka Cielo X1 2.0. What's up everybody, I'm Eric McIntyre, aka Rad Dad Bod. You're watching Rad Dad Bod TV, where we review running shoes. Today we're going to be reviewing the Hoka Cielo X1 2.0, and if it's your first time watching one of my videos, you may notice some timestamps below. Feel free to jump around to the various parts of the review, but if you do so, I would sure appreciate it if you come back and watch the full thing when you get a sec, as I put a lot of time and effort into these videos. And if you've been a watcher for a while, but you haven't yet subscribed, I would sure appreciate if you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications as well, so you get notified every time I drop a new video, which is typically every Monday through Friday. Now, just to kick off this video, we're going to start with some disclaimers and disclosures, which are that I was provided this shoe for free for the purpose of review directly from Hoka. That being said, whenever I'm given a shoe to review, I don't accept payment. I'm not given a talk track. I'm not given talking points even. No one watches the video beforehand. All thoughts are entirely my own. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about the intended use of the shoe. The Cielo X1 2.0 is Hoka's premier marathon racing shoe. So the primary use case of this shoe is to run fast for 26.2 miles. But we know with super shoes, people basically race in them. Anytime they want to run fast, they throw on a pair of super shoes. So for the most part, that's how we're going to be evaluating this shoe. Now, from a price standpoint, the shoe comes in at $275, which is consistent with the Cielo X1 release last year and is not so outlandish in the kind of premier super shoe area of shoes. A lot of super shoes are pushing that $300 mark. Unfortunately, I do think that that is a trend that's going to continue, so I wouldn't say that this is over or underpriced. It is in line with kind of that premium super shoe option. From a spec standpoint, the shoe comes in at 8.1 ounces and 229 grams, and the stack comes in at 39 in the heel, 32 in the forefoot for a 7mm heel-to-toe drop. Now, those specs probably differ from Hoka's direct website, and that's because I get all of my specs from Running Warehouse when possible, because they do their own independent measurements and measure the same way every time. Now, moving to the fit, I would say that this shoe fits true to size lengthwise. It's consistent in its length with other Hokas, so I'm normally a 10.5, this is a 10.5, and it fit great. I would say that the heel and the toe box fit pretty standard overall. I wouldn't necessarily say they're wide or narrow, but then that midfoot, I do think I would give it the official kind of, not narrow, but more snug in the midfoot. So if you are wide-footed, it may be a little bit tight there in that area. Now, moving to the upper, the shoe has an engineered jacquard mesh. And I said this in my comparison to the Rocket X2, but I thought I knew what jacquard was. I thought jacquard was more of kind of just a breathable kind of almost knit or cloth like weave. But this is a little bit more synthetic feeling overall. Now, you get a more traditional heel counter there, and you get that little flare, which is always really nice. But if you just looked at the heel in isolation, you might think that this doesn't look like a super shoe upper, because a lot of them like to have more of this sleek kind of feel here in the midfoot and toe box section. I really like this though. I think that it gives you a little bit more comfort, a little bit more structure in the heel and lockdown in the heel. And speaking of lockdown, I did feel like this shoe had some really good lockdown in the upper, despite not having a gusseted tongue, which was a little bit confusing to me why they wouldn't do that, but for the most part, the tongue hasn't given me any issues and does seem to stay in place really well. Now, I haven't needed to use the runner's knot at all. You do have that secondary, eyelet right there to be able to do the runner's knot, but what's interesting here is that the tongue is maybe a tiny bit short if you were to use the runner's knot. So something to keep in mind, but I don't anticipate a lot of people having lockdown issues in the shoe. Now, the shoe doesn't have a lot of cushion in the upper, which is pretty much expected for a super shoe, but the upper is very, very breathable, it's very lightweight, and it is very comfortable. And frankly, with a racing shoe, you want something that fits nice, something that's gonna lock you down, but then something that you're ultimately going to forget about, because if you're thinking about the upper during your race, you likely have some hot spots, some rubbing, chafing, some areas that are causing some irritation, and that's not what you're looking for. And at least for me, I had no issues there. Now, moving to the midsole, this is a really, really unique and interesting take on a midsole. You have your PEBA-based foam in the midsole, so it's going to be that soft, and it is a soft version of PEBA as opposed to like the Rocket X2 is a little bit firmer, though still soft. But this is very much kind of fitting the trend of more almost squishy super shoes that have come out this year. So if you think the Adios Pro 4, the Endorphin Elite 2, right, this is very much in line, maybe not quite as squishy as those two, but still very soft underfoot. And as soon as you're running in it, you feel that foam really, really compress. Along with the PIBA foam, you also have a winged carbon fiber plate. So you can see kind of the wing there on the medial side as well. So you can see the wing there on the lateral side as well as a wing there on the medial side. And that's supposed to aid in some level of stability. The plate construction is really, really interesting. It almost has a really, really thin plate that folds over itself. So you have like a dual layer there. It almost crosses over kind of there in the midsole. I need to learn how to do graphics so I can put like the cross section here. Still working on production quality, guys. Please stay patient with me. But it is a unique shaped plate, and I'm not really sure the rationale behind it, but I will say that the shoe is fast and it is responsive. It feels really, really nice when you're running fast. Now, this maybe should be obvious, but super shoes are not meant to run slow in. Like they're not built for slower miles, and it's not like you have to pace qualify for a super shoe by any means, but we do know through some limited studies at least that these super shoes tend to help faster runners improve more, and they tend to be more comfortable for faster runners because they're more optimized when you're running just at those quicker paces. This is one of those shoes that I do feel like it's not going to be an everyman super shoe underfoot. For one, there is this cutout here in the medial side. That makes it very unstable. Not like I often say where, hey, the shoe is not necessarily a stability shoe, but it's not inherently unstable. This is inherently unstable, right? The shoe will collapse on you in the medial side. And so if you are a heel striker or even kind of a back midfoot striker, you may overpronate in the shoe, even if you're not really like, even if you don't tend to overpronate. The shoe feels by far the best when you're running kind of on the forefoot, on the balls of your toes. In fact, it's hard to see it in this shoe. It's not like as obvious for whatever reason, but as soon as you put it on, you'll notice that it almost bulges out here kind of in the forefoot area. So it almost forces you onto your forefoot in that sense and feels uncomfortable if you are running a little bit slower. And again, slow is relative. For me though, I did kind of like a out easy, fast back, like out and back long run. And for the first half of it, I felt a little bit uncomfortable in the shoe, very unstable. And then the second half, as I picked up the pace, the shoe kind of opened up and it really felt comfortable. So that's just something to consider. Like, it is not a stable shoe. It feels best, in my opinion, will feel best to forefoot strikers, but it is very responsive. The rocker is very aggressive. It might be second only to like the Wave Rebellion Pro 3 to me in terms of aggressiveness of that rocker. It's very unique, very pronounced there in the forefoot. In fact, it reminds me a lot of the Wave Rebellion Flash, which is the Super Trainer training companion to the Wave Rebellion Pro 3. So something to kind of consider there. But ultimately the foam is soft. It's very responsive. It's very fast. For me, it feels really, really nice at kind of like my 5K pace. That's like kind of the sweet spot for the shoe. So for me, with this type of foam, this type of aggressive rocker, for me, I think that it works really, really well for like 5K to maybe half marathon. But I do think that as someone who has some overpronation issues occasionally, especially as I fatigue on my right foot, this would be a little too much for me for a full marathon. Another thing that I do want to call out is the sock liner is TPEE, which is another super foam that a lot of brands are using. Adios Pro 4 and Endorphin Elite 2. Which are two shoes I mentioned earlier. Both of those use a supercritical TPEE. So it's the same material as the sock liner. So that's just going to give you some extra kind of feeling of responsiveness and pop as soon as you put that shoe on. Now moving to that outsole, you have kind of that durable rubber compound, which is really, really solid. I just don't have many concerns. One thing I really do like is Hoka seems to have cut down a little bit on the amount of rubber that they're using on the shoe. Not from a coverage standpoint necessarily. You know, this is a pretty typical coverage for a super shoe, if not a little bit more. More so just like the thickness of the rubber doesn't seem quite as much as what was in the Cielo X1 as well as the Rocket X2. So we're saving some weight. This shoe, you know, it corrected a lot of things in my opinion, with the upper being a little bit more streamlined, with the foam being a lot more responsive, the shoe overall being a lot more lightweight. And then I do think that the rubber allowed them to have some of those weight savings. I've run in rain in these shoes. I've run on some kind of slick, wettish roads in these shoes. I have not had any traction issues whatsoever in them, and I would feel very confident even in a rainy marathon situation in these shoes. So I think Hoka is, my experience with Hoka, at least with their outsoles on their racing shoes, has been very, very positive, and I expect that this will give you no issues in that sense. The other thing, just looking at a durability, now I have just over 30 miles on these right now, hoping to be able to do more. I have a backlog of shoes, so gonna try and hit 30 plus on all of them and then be able to go back to my favorites depending on what else shows up on my doorstep. But I do think that you're gonna have some good durability on the outsole. I'm not seeing any noticeable wear and tear through 30 plus miles yet. Now, as far as who's this shoe for, like I said, this has gotta be one of the biggest swings from like a first to second iteration in a shoe, because the Cielo X1 was probably one of the most pace versatile, like everyman accessible super shoes on the market. I loved that shoe. It was very fun, very responsive. It was just heavy to me, and it just didn't seem to take as many risks as you often need to take in a super shoe for it to be kind of that top tier super shoe. This is gonna frustrate a lot of fans of the Cielo X1. Like, this shoe is not gonna be well received by those individuals. In fact, I've already seen comments on some of my other videos when I did comparisons with this shoe of frustrations. People saying, why would Hoka make a shoe that the everyman can't use when, you know, there's already so many of those? The reality is, super shoes are not designed for the everyman. Super shoes are designed for their pro athletes, and it trickles down into the market. So they're not supposed to be stable. They're not supposed to be like accessible. Now, I'm not saying ignore that section of the market. No, not at all. That's where super trainers, right? Plated trainers tend to come in and are oftentimes a really good option for those who need a little bit more stability, or who need something that's going to be a little bit more comfortable for like a 4, 5, 6 hour marathon, right? But this top tier super shoes are technically built for the faster runners. This is not built for me. It's not the shoe that I would choose today for my fastest marathon, because I think I would break down. So who's the shoe for? I think that this is the type of shoe that like the 230 to 250 marathoner is kind of be more comfortable wearing, right? There are going to be exceptions to that rule. There are going to be people who have the stride that works for this shoe, but I think that this is made for the like sub-elite and elite athlete, not necessarily for the everyman, right? Now, that doesn't mean you can't enjoy it. I just think for the marathon distance, people are gonna struggle in the shoe if they don't have a really buttoned up stride. If you have a nice stride, or if you're doing a shorter distance, like for me, I think I could take this on a half marathon and I'd be okay. Some people might want it for a 5K, for a 10K, for just speed work in general, and it's gonna work really, really nice in that area. The question just becomes, can you justify that cost for non-marathon racing usage? And maybe if you feel like you can use it for every race for a couple of years, it will be worth it to you. So really kind of a personal decision there, but I do think that this is going to be one of your more like sub-elite, elite runner style super shoes. Now, just some final thoughts on the shoe. I really like it. It's what I was hoping for in the Cielo X1. It's what I thought it was going to be. Now, I will say it is less stable than I would have hoped for in that scenario, because the Rocket X2 I do think is inherently stable, and I don't think it sacrifices speed because of it. And so I did expect it to be a little bit more stable, but all in all, like the foam, the responsiveness, the bounce you get in the shoe, the upper, the lockdown, the comfort, like it checks all my boxes, and it's a lot lighter than past versions. I still think it can get like even a little bit lighter. But overall, I think it was a big improvement over the Cielo X1 for marathon racing. Specifically, I would like to see, you know, in the Cielo X1 3.0, assuming that does come, I would guess in 2 years from now, if they did a Rocket X3 update next year, then I would expect this to maybe get a little bit more stable. Maybe they change where the cutout is in the midsole, but I do know that that change was a actual direct reaction, or like input from their professional athletes requested that it move from the lateral to the medial. So we'll see what happens there. Overall, I think Hoka did a really nice job, despite what might be a little bit of backlash from the everyman runner. From a super shoe perspective, I really like the shoe. Now, if you're still watching, I sure appreciate you. Please take a second, let me know in the comments what you enjoyed about this video, or what I could be doing better to constantly improve these videos for each and every one of you. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, turn on notifications so you get notified every time I drop a video. And with that, I'll end with a question, which is, do you think running shoe companies need to make more super shoes for the everyman, or do you feel like the super trainer is enough? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you, everybody.